Boston Red Sox had the curse of the Bambino is what they call it, because the Boston Red Sox traded Babe Ruth to the Yankees for just money. Just $100,000. That was it. And they ended up getting a curse and everything. Some other horrible deals in history that I looked up. The Indians actually sold Manhattan, New York for $24 of trinkets in 1626. $24. That's what I would say. The Indians got a bad deal. Someone even has said recently that one of the worst deals that we've had in recent years is our president trading, what was it? Let's see. He traded one obvious deserter for 5 of the most cunning and vicious mass murderers and American haters in history. That was, how many of you guys have ever heard of over the summer he made that swap with a prisoner and everything? It was people from Al-Qaeda. Well, we're just talking about bad deals. People make a deal and you don't see the results of it till the end. Well, I would say in the Bible, this has got to go down as one of the worst deals of all time. A bowl of soup, basically, is what you're getting, what you're trading away for your birthright. Now, what was this birthright? What did this mean? Back in Bible times, the birthright was very important. It was a sacred thing. It belonged to the firstborn. So the firstborn was lifted up. He got many of the blessings. And it wasn't just material pleasures and everything. We know through the Bible that what this birthright included was the promised Messiah coming through the Hebrew race. That in this special case of Esau and Jacob, that meant the one to whom belonged the birthright was the one through who the covenant promise made to their grandfather Abraham would be realized. Ultimately, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, would come through the holder of the birthright and bless the nations of the earth. Esau was the firstborn, and the birthright was his to belong to. But like many, and like us, he failed to appreciate its value and sacredness. So Esau traded in one of the most important things you could possibly have for a bowl of soup. That's what he traded over. It sounds ridiculous. But what does that mean to us? What does Esau trading his birthright mean to us? How does this apply to us? The application is that there are people making the same decision every single day. We have been guilty ourselves of even making it. No, it's not in the same way. We don't have the same promise and the firstborn promise like it was in the Old Testament. But there are unsaved people doing this. By forsaking, by giving up something that is so treasured, their spiritual inheritance, the gospel. There are people that, to know what the gospel is, know it includes it, but they choose their bowl of soup over it. There are Christians like us who are saved people, children of God, who do this too. We have been guilty of this. We know that all that is promised in God's word by following Christ completely, and yet we still reject him for our bowl of soup. We take the temporary things, and we value them over what is promised in a relationship with Christ and all the joys that we have in following Christ. We are all guilty of despising our spiritual inheritance. Turn to Hebrews 12:16, because the Bible has a word for this. This is another time Esau's name is mentioned in Scripture. Hebrews 12:16. The word that the Bible uses here is profane. In Hebrews 12 and verse 16, it says, "Lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright." Profane, we think of something as just something awful and horrible and wicked, but profane simply just means a lack of holiness. See, if we take something holy and good, like a relationship with Christ, and we treat it with contempt, then we have profaned it. And that's what we so often have done. I've done this. To treat the things of God as ordinary is to profane or despise them. And it shows a lack of godliness, and that is what, basically this is what the New Testament says about Esau. He was immoral and lacked concern for pleasing God. His spiritual blessings and responsibilities meant nothing to him. And the Lord tells us here in Hebrews tells us to be sure we are not like Esau in this. That there be no immoral or godless person like Esau who sold his own birthright for a single meal. So how do we keep ourselves if we know we're not supposed to despise our spiritual inheritance, our birthright, and what our birthright is, as Hebrews describes it, is our so great salvation. What we have as children of God, as saved Christians, what we have is such a great salvation. We are free in Christ. We have a relationship with God. That is something that nothing can be more joyous. Nothing can leave us more satisfied than that. And if we take that and we forsake it, it's the same as like Esau forsaking his birthright back in Genesis. So how do we keep ourselves from despising our birthright or our spiritual inheritance or our relationship with Christ? I'm going to be calling it many different things, but number one, we keep ourselves from despising our birthright by valuing every spiritual opportunity that has been given us. We value that we appreciate, we don't turn away from our spiritual inheritance, our salvation, by valuing the spiritual opportunities we've been given. Look at who Esau was. Look at who, you can maybe think of someone who has the greatest heritage of family in the world, and they have maybe a line of preachers, pastors, missionaries as their father and grandfather. And there are people who have had such a great spiritual ancestry, but I don't think any of us can compare to having the ancestry that Esau had. Esau's father was Isaac. His grandfather was Abraham. I mean, that was the head of the nation of Israel. That were the people that God selected. He was surrounded by those people. He wasn't separated from them. He had every spiritual opportunity that he could have had to grow under their leadership, under being around them. And he was surrounded by every spiritual opportunity possible, but he still forsook it. He still took away what God meant to be treasured, and he took it and he threw it away as not corn over a bowl of soup. I know many of us can even vouch for ourselves, and I'll just give a personal reflection on how good God has been to us in the spiritual blessings that God has given us. We all have a spiritual blessing right here and now by being called children of God, by being saved. How many of us God has saved you? God has saved you and made a difference in your life. We all have those spiritual blessings. We all have a spiritual blessing by sitting here right at Stokely's Chapel. This is an amazing church where the Bible is preached, where we continually see God's presence, where we saw God's presence clearly working this morning and moving, and it was amazing. It's amazing to see it. We don't get that. You don't just get that easily. That's not at every street corner. That's not at every church. It's an amazing blessing what we have here. And it's so easy. We can forsake all that is included in following Christ by not valuing those spiritual blessings in our life. I know I've personally forsaken the spiritual blessings in my life. I have come from a family, my parents, just to give you a personal testimony, my parents did not grow up in Christian homes. My mother, get this, was saved by a friend who invited her to Vacation Bible School. If you don't think Vacation Bible School doesn't do anything, I'll just say my mother is a product of the work that is done at Vacation Bible School. This was years ago up in Michigan, and she still was not raised in a Christian home her entire life, yet was saved at a Vacation Bible School, and on her own chose to go to church, chose to grow in the Lord, get involved in her church, went off to a secular university, went to Michigan State University, lived in the wicked dorms, the lifestyle and everything, and yet still kept close to God and followed him through all of that. My father grew up in a strong Roman Catholic home and was actually almost pushed aside and not entirely shunned, but just not looked down upon after he came to Christ. Him and my mother, I didn't come from a family of preachers or anything. Him and my father and mother were both journalists. They met working at a newspaper together. And my mother, actually dating my father, said, "I will not marry you if you're not saved," and led him to Christ. And my father turned away from the Catholic faith, and his family, by that, turned away from all of that, and on his own sought through the scriptures and came to Christ. So my family was really, the foundation of Christ was laid at that time. My parents had 12 children, and I am smack dab in the middle of it. They raised us all in a good, godly home. They put us all in church at a young age. We were raised in it. I'm not saying my home is far from perfect. I'm not vouching and saying any of that, but I was raised in a strong, godly home. And I was raised in I was able to be privileged to go to a Christian school up in Michigan. I even came down to Bible College in Knoxville a couple of years ago. I was surrounded by spiritual blessings, and yet there was a time in my life where I took it all and I forsook it. I didn't get to appreciate the values of growing up in a Christian home. And all of us have had some type of spiritual blessings. Maybe not us that have grown up in a Christian home or have that exact type of spiritual blessing, but we have all so much we can look back on and look on our lives and how God has blessed us through that. And my heart cry to the teens right now is just to say, you guys have all been blessed, as I have, by being able to come to this church and being raised in church. When there's people who haven't set door into a church and are influenced by God or godly people their entire lives. And it is so easy, like I did, to just forsake all of that because I didn't appreciate what it really was. And it's so easy for us to do the same. For us to take all that we're blessed with our Christian homes, with parents or just adults that we're surrounded by who love the Lord and influence us. And there may be even church members here who we don't really understand the value of what we have here, and what we have in Christ in relationship with Him. And it's so easy, like I did, to turn away from God and turn away and forsake my salvation or my birthright for something as measly as a bowl of soup. I fell into that. I fell into forsaking God, and totally turning away from all the spiritual blessings I had been blessed with. As I know some in here have maybe can vouch and say and testify the same way and say God has done the same. I turned away when God had blessed me so much. But that is how one way we fall into. We don't fall into forsaking our salvation when we stop and we just appreciate. Just sit right here and think about how much God has blessed you. Think about how many blessings He has filled us with just in our surroundings right now. Just in a church where we can come and worship Him in a free country. Where we don't have to hide and secretly meet amongst Christians and be persecuted. Where we have that freedom. That's a blessing in itself. And we can be surrounded by Christian friends, by Christian home, or we can just be with a fellowship of believers. Let us not forsake and overlook the value of that. I made the mistake of doing that. My heart cry, especially the teens, is to have you guys realize not to forsake that. And years down the road, as I know years down the road, I'm going to look back and even be even more in amazement at how much God has blessed me. And you guys will look back, too, at the time you've been able to be here in the youth group and here at Stokely's and appreciate all that you had here. But appreciate it now and not years later after regret. And that is one way where basically I say we can keep ourselves, as the Lord shows us, from despising our birthright by valuing it. If Esau had valued his spiritual heritage, he would not have forsaken his birthright. If he had valued all that he had, all his surroundings, and what God had blessed him with, then he wouldn't have fallen into that. The second was we keep ourselves from despising our birthright by fighting the temptation to value the temporary over the spiritual. Esau took a bowl of soup. I don't know if this was a good flavor of soup. I don't know if it was clam chowder. I say chowder because I was up in New England and they talked like that. And I get made fun of because sometimes I talk like that now, but I don't mean to. But I don't know if it was clam chowder or chicken noodle or potato. Maybe think of the best soup you've had. I've had some really good soup lately. I'm just going to take a pause. Is that I've had some good soup by Mama Wyatt, like lasagna soup and taco soup, and I'm like, maybe this isn't the kind of soup that Jacob made for Esau. Maybe. Probably not. But maybe. It was good, though. But seriously, I don't know what bowl of soup he had, but you know, Esau didn't have like this magical bowl of soup where he drank or ate it or stew or whatever and ate it, and he was never hungry again. You know what? A couple hours came by later, and do you think he really wasn't hungry ever again? No. He was hungry because it was just temporary. It was something that didn't matter. It was something that didn't last. And he took an eternal spiritual blessing, whereas he would be in the Bible for accepting that birthright and being used of God for bringing the Messiah into this world. But instead, he's not. Why? Because of a bowl of soup? How ridiculous does that sound? How ridiculous does it sound that someone could take something and value that temporary over what lasts, over what's eternal, over what's forever? But we are guilty of the same exact things. When we take anything, it doesn't even have to be something necessarily sinful, but when we take things of this world and value them over a relationship with Christ, and we all have, and I've done this too, when we take something that's cheap and that's something that gives us temporary pleasure like sin or anything in this world, and we take that, we're doing the same exact thing that Esau did by forsaking his birthright. When we're forsaking what we have is when we can serve Christ and live for Him and serve Him, when we have this salvation and we have the greatest gift in all the world that beats all the money in the world, all the pleasure in this world, all the fame, all the fortune, all the sinful pleasures. It tops all of it, but we're doing the same exact thing. So my question to you is, what is your bowl of soup? What is the soup? What are you taking that's temporary that is taking the place of what really matters. Because I've been there. When I was away from God and just was rebelling against Him for a period of time in my life, I took something that was cheap, something that didn't offer me any happiness at all. The only thing that brings us true satisfaction is Jesus Christ. Amen. And living for Him and that relationship that we have with Him. And when we take that and we step back and we resist the temptation, and we can't do that without Christ. When we take back and we see that, then we won't forsake our salvation and the relationship we have with Christ. When we take back and we stop and see that, look, this world is going to face us with temptations. And if I can turn again to the teenagers on Youth Sunday and just say, you will be faced, and you're going to be faced with temptation as we all are every single day, and it's never going to stop for the rest of our lives. But especially, I know every adult here can vouch and say the temptations you face as a young person are intense, and especially now more than ever with the world throwing things left and right, saying you can find happiness in this, you can find happiness in this. And that's why we see people falter and fall away from Christ. They fall from their relationship with Him. Because the world is throwing all these things that are promising us happiness and pleasure and satisfaction, and it's all temporary. It's as temporary as a bowl of soup will fill you up. And that's what the world faces us with. And we value our salvation and our relationship with Christ by stopping and realizing that nothing this world has to offer can bring us lasting satisfaction or solution. Who can testify of that? I hear testimonies all the time of guys who have turned away into this world and just been torn up by the world. And what did that ever really bring them true lasting satisfaction? No. The only thing that can is Christ. The only thing. Living for Him. Esau had to find this out the hard way. It's our salvation and our spiritual inheritance is something we must value. It's something we cannot push away. And my just question is for you guys tonight is, what is your attitude towards those spiritual things? Towards our salvation? Do you really value them? Do we value them the way Esau did, or the way we ought to? There was times I've just shared how I do not value the spiritual things in my life. And I constantly have to ask myself, do I really have a spiritual hunger for the things of God and what truly matters? And I know us approaching this revival coming up, we still have to ask ourselves, do we really desire the spiritual? Do we really desire to grow closer to Christ? And there are times we haven't. I know there's times I have to just sit and reflect and ask God to help me have those right desires. To not forsake the salvation we have and the greatest joy that we have, which is following Christ completely. Nothing beats that. Nothing beats that. We cannot forsake that, and we won't forsake that when we stop and we value what we've been given. And we don't let the temptations of this world take our eyes off of what really matters. What is your attitude towards spiritual things? Do I really have a spiritual hunger for the things of God? Thank you.
Amen. I'll get to prayer. We've been given the Word tonight. And I wonder how many times we put the temporary over the eternal.